Chrysler Building is an Art Deco-style skyscraper located in the Turtle Bay neighborhood on the east side of Manhattan, New York City, at the intersection of 42nd Street and Lexington Avenue near Midtown Manhattan. At 1,046 feet, 318.9 meters, the structure was the world's tallest building for 11 months before it was surpassed by the Empire State Building in 1931. It is the tallest brick building in the world with a steel framework. As of 2019, the Chrysler is the 11th tallest building in the city, tied with the New York Times building. Originally a project of real estate developer and former New York State Senator William H. Reynolds, the building was constructed by Walter Chrysler, the head of the Chrysler Corporation, and served as the corporation's headquarters from 1930 until the mid-1950s. The Chrysler Building's construction was characterized by a competition with 40 Wall Street and the Empire State Building to become the world's tallest building. Although the Chrysler Building was built and designed specifically for the car manufacturer, the corporation did not pay for its construction and never owned it. Rather, Walter Chrysler decided to pay for it himself so that his children could inherit it. When the Chrysler Building opened, there were mixed reviews of the building's design, ranging from views of it as inane and unoriginal to the idea that it was modernist and iconic. Perceptions of the building have slowly evolved into its now being seen as a paragon of the Art Deco architectural style, and in 2007, it was ranked 9th on the list of America's favorite architecture by the American Institute of Architects. The building was designated a New York City landmark in 1978, and was added to the National Register of Historic Places as a National Historic Landmark in 1976. History. In the mid-1920s, New York's metropolitan area surpassed London's as the world's most populous metropolitan area, and its population exceeded 10 million by the early 1930s. The era was characterized by profound social and technological changes. Consumer goods such as radio, cinema, and the automobile became widespread. In 1927, Walter Chrysler's automotive company, the Chrysler Corporation, became the third largest car manufacturer in the United States, behind Ford and General Motors. The following year, Chrysler was named Time magazine's Person of the Year. The economic boom of the 1920s and speculation in the real estate market fostered a wave of new skyscraper projects in New York City. The Chrysler Building was built as part of an ongoing building boom that resulted in the city having the world's tallest building from 1908 to 1974. Following the end of World War I, European and American architects came to see simplified design as the epitome of the modern era and Art Deco skyscrapers as symbolizing progress, innovation, and modernity. The 1916 zoning resolution restricted the height that street-side exterior walls of New York City buildings could rise before needing to be set back from the street. This led to the construction of Art Deco structures in New York City with significant setbacks, large volumes, and striking silhouettes that were often elaborately decorated. Art Deco buildings were constructed for only a short period of time, but because that period was during the city's late 1920s real estate boom, the numerous skyscrapers built in the Art Deco style predominated in the city skyline, giving it the romantic quality seen in films and plays. The Chrysler Building project was shaped by these circumstances. The land on which the Chrysler Building stands was donated to the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art in 1902. The site is roughly a trapezoid with a 201-foot-long, 61 meters, frontage on Lexington Avenue, a 167-foot-long, 51 meters, frontage on 42nd Street, and a 205-foot-long, 62 meters, frontage on 43rd Street. The site bordered the old Boston Post Road, which predated, and ran aslant of, the Manhattan street grid established by the Commissioner's Plan of 1811. As a result, the east side of the building's base is similarly aslant. Planning. Originally, the Chrysler Building was to be the Reynolds Building, a project of real estate developer and former New York State Senator William H. Reynolds. Prior to his involvement in planning the building, Reynolds was best known for developing Coney Island's Dreamland amusement park. When the amusement park was destroyed by fire in 1911, Reynolds turned his attention to Manhattan real estate, where he set out to build the tallest building in the world. In 1921, Reynolds rented a large plot of land at the corner of Lexington Avenue and 42nd Street with the intention of building a tall building on the site. In 1927, after several years of delays, Reynolds hired the architect William Van Allen to build a 40-story building there. Van Allen was respected in his field for his work on the Albemarle Building at Broadway and 24th Street, designing it in collaboration with his partner H. Craig Severance. Van Allen and Severance complemented each other, with Van Allen being an original, imaginative architect and Severance being a shrewd businessperson who handled the firm's finances. However, the relationship between them became tense over disagreements on how best to run the firm. The breaking point came after a 1924 article in the Architectural Review that praised the Albemarle building's design, which the article attributed to Van Allen, while ignoring Severance's role altogether. The architects' partnership dissolved acrimoniously several months later, with lawsuits over the firm's clients and assets lasting over a year. This ended up being decisive for the design of the future Chrysler building, since Severance's more traditional architectural style would otherwise have restrained Van Allen's more modern outlook. Design. By February 2, 1928, the proposed building's height had been increased to 54 stories, which would have made it the tallest building in Midtown. The proposal was changed again 2 weeks later, with official plans for a 63-story building. A little more than a week after that, the plan was changed for the third time, with 2 additional stories added. By this time, 42nd Street and Lexington Avenue were both hubs for construction activity, due to the removal of the 3rd Avenue Elevated's 42nd Street spur, which was seen as a blight on the area. The 56-story chain-in building, diagonally across the intersection from Reynolds's proposed building, was also under construction. Because of the elevated spur's removal, real estate speculators believed that Lexington Avenue would become the Broadway of the East Side, causing a ripple effect that would spur developments farther east. In April 1928, Reynolds signed a 67-year lease for the plot and finalized the details of his ambitious project. Van Allen's original design for the skyscraper called for a base with first-floor showroom windows that would be triple height, and above would be 12 stories with glass-wrapped corners, to create the impression that the tower was floating in mid-air. Reynolds's main contribution to the building's design was his insistence that it have a metallic crown. Despite Van Allen's initial opposition, the metal and crystal crown would have looked like a jeweled sphere at night. Originally, the skyscraper would have risen 808 feet 246 meters with 67 floors. These plans were approved in June 1928. Van Allen's drawings were unveiled in the following August and published in a magazine run by the American Institute of Architects (AIA). Eventually, this design would prove too advanced and expensive for Reynolds. He instead devised an alternate design for the Reynolds building, which was published in August 1928. The new design was much more conservative, with an Italianate dome that a critic compared to Governor Al Smith's bowler hat, and a brick arrangement on the upper floors that simulated windows in the corners, a detail that remains in the current Chrysler building. This design almost exactly reflected the shape, setbacks, and the layout of the windows of the current building, but with a different dome. Construction and finalization of plans. With the design complete, groundbreaking for the Reynolds building took place on September 19, 1928, but Reynolds did not have the means to carry on construction. Reynolds sold the plot, leased plans, and architect's services to Walter Chrysler for $2 million on October 15, 1928. That same day, the Goodwin Construction Company began demolition of what had been built. A contract was awarded on October 28, and demolition was completed on November 9. Chrysler's initial plans for the building were similar to Reynolds's, but with the 808-foot building having 68 floors instead of 67. The plans entailed a ground floor pedestrian arcade, a facade of stone below the 5th floor, a brick and terracotta facade above, and a 3-story observation dome, with bronze and glass, at the top. However, Chrysler wanted a more progressive design, and he worked with Van Allen to redesign the skyscraper to be 925 feet 282 meters tall. At the new height, Chrysler's building would be taller than the 792-foot 241 meters Woolworth building, a building in Lower Manhattan that was the world's tallest at the time. From late 1928 to early 1929, modifications to the design of the dome continued. In March 1929, the press published details of an artistic dome that had the shape of a giant 30-pointed star, which would be crowned by a sculpture 5 meters high. The final design of the dome included several arches and triangular windows. Lower down, the design was affected by Walter Chrysler's intention to make the building the Chrysler Corporation's headquarters, and as such, various architectural details were modeled after Chrysler automobile products, such as the hood ornaments of the Plymouth C-section designs between setbacks. The building's gargoyles on the 31st floor and the eagles on the 61st floor were designed to signify flight, and to exemplify the machine age of the 1920s. Even the topmost needle was built using a process similar to one Chrysler used to manufacture his cars, with precise hand craftsmanship. In his autobiography, Chrysler says he suggested that his building be taller than the Eiffel Tower. Meanwhile, excavation of the new building's 69-foot deep 21 meters foundation began in mid-November 1928 and was completed in mid-January 1929, when bedrock was reached. A total of 105 million pounds, 48 million kilograms of rock and 36 million pounds, 16 million kilograms of soil was excavated for the foundation, equal to 63% of the future building's weight. Construction of the building proper began on January 21, 1929. The Carnegie Steel Company provided the steel beams, the first of which was installed on March 27, and by April 9, the first upright beams had been set into place. The steel structure was a few floors high by June 1929, 35 floors high by early August, and completed by September. Despite a frantic steelwork construction pace of about 4 floors per week, no workers died during the construction of the skyscraper's steelwork. Chrysler lauded this achievement, saying, "It is the first time that any structure in the world has reached such a height, yet the entire steel construction was accomplished without loss of life." In total, 391,881 rivets were used, and approximately 3,826,000 bricks were manually laid to create the non-load-bearing walls of the skyscraper. Walter Chrysler personally financed the construction with his income from his car company. The Chrysler Building's height officially surpassed the Woolworths on October 16, 1929, thereby becoming the world's tallest structure. The same year that the Chrysler Building's construction started, banker George L. Ostrom proposed the construction of a 47-story office building at 40 Wall Street downtown. Shortly thereafter, Ostrom modified his project to have 60 floors, but it was still below Woolworth and the 808-foot Chrysler Building project as announced in 1928. H. Craig Severance, Van Allen's former partner and the architect of 40 Wall Street, increased 40 Wall's height to 840 feet 260 meters with 62 floors in April of that year. It would thus exceed the Woolworth's height by 48 feet 15 meters and the Chrysler's by 32 feet 9.8 meters. 40 Wall Street and the Chrysler Building started competing for the distinction of world's tallest building. The Empire State Building, on 34th Street and 5th Avenue, entered the competition in 1929. The race into the sky, as popular media called it at the time, was representative of the country's optimism in the 1920s, which helped fuel the building boom in major cities. The 40 Wall Street Tower was revised from 840 feet 260 meters to 925 feet in April 1929, which would make it the world's tallest. Severance increased the height of his project and then publicly claimed the title of the world's tallest building. Construction of 40 Wall Street began in May 1929 at a frantic pace, and it was completed 12 months later. In response, Van Allen obtained permission for a 125-foot-long, 38 meters spire and had it secretly constructed inside the frame of his building. The spire was delivered to the site in 4 different sections. On October 23, 1929, 1 week after surpassing the Woolworth Building's height and 1 day before the catastrophic Wall Street crash of 1929 started, the spire was assembled. According to one account, the bottom section of the spire was hoisted to the top of the building's dome and lowered into the 66th floor of the building. Then, within 90 minutes, the rest of the spire's pieces were raised and riveted in sequence, helping raise the tower's height to 1,046 feet. Van Allen, who witnessed the process from the street along with its engineers and Walter Chrysler, compared the experience to watching a butterfly leaving its cocoon. In The Structure and Metalwork of the Chrysler Building, an article published in the October 1930 edition of Architectural Forum, Van Allen explained the design and construction of the crown and needle. A high spire structure with a needle-like termination was designed to surmount the dome. This is 185 feet high and 8 feet square at its base. It was made up of 4 corner angles with light angle strut and diagonal members, all told weighing 27 tons. It was manifestly impossible to assemble this structure and hoist it as a unit from the ground, and equally impossible to hoist it in sections and place them as such in their final positions. Besides, it would be more spectacular, for publicity value, to have this cloud-piercing needle appear unexpectedly. The steel tip brought the Chrysler Building to a height of 1,046 feet, 319 meters, greatly exceeding 40 Wall Street's height. However, contemporary news media did not write of the spire's erection, nor were there any press releases celebrating the spire's erection. Even the New York Herald Tribune, which had virtually continuous coverage of the tower's construction, did not report on the spire's installation until days after the spire had been raised. Chrysler realized that his tower's height would exceed the Empire State Building's as well, having ordered Van Allen to change the Chrysler's original roof from a stubby Romanesque dome to the narrow steel spire. However, the Empire State's developer John J. Raskob reviewed the plans and realized that he could add 5 more floors and a spire of his own to his 80-story building, and subsequently acquired the nearby plots needed to support that building's height extension. 2 days later, the Empire State Building's co-developer, former Governor Al Smith, announced the updated plans for that skyscraper, with an observation deck on the 86th floor roof at a height of 1,050 feet, 320 meters, higher than the Chrysler's 71st floor observation deck at 783 feet, 239 meters. Completion. In January 1930, it was announced that the Chrysler Corporation would maintain offices in the Chrysler Building during Automobile Show Week, and the first leases by outside tenants were announced in April 1930, before the building was officially completed. The building was formally opened on May 27, 1930, in a ceremony that coincided with the 42nd Street Property Owners and Merchants Association's meeting that year. In the lobby of the building, a bronze plaque that read, "In recognition of Mr. Chrysler's contribution to civic advancement," was unveiled. Former Governor Smith, former Assemblyman Martin G. McHugh, and 42nd Street Association President George W. Sweeney were among those in attendance. By June, it was reported that 65% of the available space had been leased. By August, the building was declared complete, but the New York City Department of Construction did not mark it as finished until February 1932. The added height of the spire allowed the Chrysler Building to surpass 40 Wall Street as the tallest building in the world and the Eiffel Tower as the tallest structure. The Chrysler Building was thus the first man-made structure to be taller than 1,000 feet, 300 meters. And as one newspaper noted, the tower was also taller than the highest points of 5 states. The Chrysler Building was appraised at $14 million, but was exempt from city taxes per an 1859 law that gave tax exemptions to sites owned by the Cooper Union. The city had attempted to repeal the tax exemption, but Cooper Union had opposed that measure. Because the Chrysler Building retains the tax exemption, it has paid Cooper Union for the use of their land since opening. Van Allen's satisfaction at these accomplishments was likely muted by Walter Chrysler's later refusal to pay the balance of his architectural fee. Chrysler alleged that Van Allen had received bribes from suppliers, and Van Allen had not signed any contracts with Walter Chrysler when he took over the project. Van Allen sued and the courts ruled in his favor, requiring Chrysler to pay Van Allen $840,000, or 6% of the total budget of the building. However, the lawsuit against Chrysler markedly diminished Van Allen's reputation as an architect, which, along with the effects of the Great Depression and negative criticism, ended up ruining his career. Van Allen ended his career as professor of sculpture at the nearby Beaux-Arts Institute of Design and died in 1954. According to author Neil Bascom, the Chrysler Building was his greatest accomplishment, and the one that guaranteed his obscurity. The completed Chrysler Building garnered mixed reviews in the press. Van Allen was hailed as the Doctor of Altitude by Architect magazine, while architect Kenneth Murkison called Van Allen the Ziegfeld of his profession, comparing him to popular Broadway producer Florence Ziegfeld Jr. The building was praised for being an expression of the intense activity and vibrant life of our day, and for teeming with the spirit of modernism, the epitome of modern business life, standing for progress in architecture and in modern building methods. An anonymous critic wrote in Architectural Forum's October 1930 issue, "The Chrysler stands by itself, something apart and alone. It is simply the realization, the fulfillment in metal and masonry, of a one-man dream, a dream of such ambitions and such magnitude as to defy the comprehension and the criticism of ordinary men or by ordinary standards." Negative critics included journalist George S. Chappell, who called the Chrysler's design distinctly a stunt design, evolved to make the man in the street look up, and Douglas Haskell, who said that the building embodies no compelling, organic idea. Others compared the Chrysler Building to an upended swordfish, or claimed it had a Little Nemo-like design. Lewis Mumford, a supporter of the international style and one of the foremost architectural critics of the United States at the time, despised the building for its inane romanticism, meaningless voluptuousness, and void symbolism. The Chrysler Building's distinction as the world's tallest building was short-lived. John Raskob realized the 1,050-foot Empire State Building would only be 4 feet, 1.2 meters taller than the Chrysler Building, and Raskob was afraid that Walter Chrysler might try to pull a trick like hiding a rod in the spire and then sticking it up at the last minute. Another revision brought the Empire State Building's roof to 1,250 feet, 380 meters, making it the tallest building in the world by far when it opened on May 1, 1931. However, the Chrysler Building is still the world's tallest steel-supported brick building. The Chrysler Building fared better commercially than the Empire State Building did. By 1935, the Chrysler had already rented 70% of its floor area, while the Empire State had only leased 23% of its area and was popularly derided as the empty state building. Contrary to popular belief, the Chrysler Corporation was never involved in the construction or ownership of the Chrysler Building, although it was built and designed for the corporation and served as its headquarters until the mid-1950s. It was a project of Walter P. Chrysler for his children. In his autobiography, Chrysler wrote that he wanted to erect the building so that his sons would have something to be responsible for. Later history. The Chrysler family inherited the property after the death of Walter Chrysler in 1940, with the property being under the ownership of W. P. Chrysler Building Corporation. In 1944, the corporation filed plans to build a 38-story annex to the east of the building, at 666 3rd Avenue. In 1949, this was revised to a 32-story annex costing $9 million. The annex building, designed by Reinhard, Hofmeister and Wellquist, had a facade similar to that of the original Chrysler building. The stone for the original building was no longer manufactured, and had to be specially replicated. Construction started on the annex in June 1950, and the first tenants started leasing in June 1951. The building itself was completed by 1952, and a sky bridge connecting the two buildings' 7th floors was built in 1959. The family sold the building in 1953 to William Zeckendorf for its assessed price of $18 million. The 1953 deal included the annex and the nearby Graybar building, which along with the Chrysler building sold for a combined $52 million. The new owners were Zeckendorf's company Webb & Knapp, who held a 75% interest in the sale, and the Chrysler Corporation, who held a 25% stake. At the time, it was reported to be the largest real estate sale in New York City's history. In 1957, the Chrysler building, its annex, and the Graybar building were sold for $66 million to Lawrence Wyans Realty Syndicate, setting a new record for the largest sale in the city. In 1960, the complex was purchased by Sol Goldman and Alex DiLorenzo, who received a mortgage from the Massachusetts Mutual Life Insurance Company. In 1961, the building's stainless steel elements, including the needle, crown, gargoyles, and entrance doors, were polished for the first time. A group of 10 workers steam cleaned the facade below the 30th floor, and manually cleaned the portion of the tower above the 30th floor, for a cost of about $200,000. Massachusetts Mutual obtained outright ownership in 1975 after Goldman and DiLorenzo defaulted on the mortgage. The company purchased the building for $35 million. In 1978, they devised plans to renovate the facade, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, elevators, lobby murals, and Cloud Club headquarters in a $23 million project. This renovation was completed in 1979. They delegated the leasing of the building's space to the Edward S. Gordon Company, which leased 750,000 square feet, 70,000 square meters, of vacant space within 5 years. During Massachusetts Mutual's ownership of the Chrysler building, the tower received 2 historic designations. The building was designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1976, and as a New York City Landmark in 1978, although the city only landmarked the lobby and facade. Massachusetts Mutual had opposed the city landmark designation because it would cause inevitable delay in moving new tenants into the skyscraper. At the time, the building had 500,000 square feet, 46,000 square meters, of vacant floor space, representing 40% of the total floor area. In September 1979, the building was sold again, this time to entrepreneur and Washington Redskins owner Jack Kent Cooke, in a deal that also transferred ownership of the Los Angeles Kings and Lakers to Jerry Buss. The Spire underwent a restoration that was completed in 1995. The joints in the now closed observation deck were polished, and the facade restored, as part of a $1.5 million project. Some damaged steel strips of the needle were replaced and several parts of the gargoyles were re-welded together. The cleaning received the New York Landmarks Conservancy's Lucy G. Moses Preservation Award for 1997. Cooke died in 1997, and creditors moved to foreclose on the estate's unpaid fees soon after. Tishman Spire Properties and the Travelers Insurance Group bought the Chrysler Center in 1997 to 1998 for about $220 million, equal to $350 million in 2019, from a consortium of banks and the estate of Jack Kent Cooke. Tishman Spire Properties had negotiated a 150-year lease from the Cooper Union, and the college continues to own the land under the Chrysler building. Cooper Union's name is on the deed. In 2001, a 75% stake in the building was sold, for $300 million United States dollars, equal to $430 million in 2019, to TMW, the German arm of an Atlanta-based investment fund. In June 28, it was reported that the Abu Dhabi Investment Council was in negotiations to buy TMW's 75% economic interest, a 15% interest from Tishman Spire Properties in the building, and a share of the Triland's retail structure next door for $800 million United States dollars. In July 28, it was announced that the transaction had been completed, and that the Abu Dhabi Investment Council was now 90% owner of the building, with Tishman Spire retaining 10%. From 2010 to 2011, the building's energy, plumbing, and waste management systems were renovated. This resulted in a 21% decrease in the building's total energy consumption, a 64% decrease in water consumption, and an 81% rate of waste being recycled. In 2012, the building received a LEED Gold accreditation from the U.S. Green Building Council, which recognized the building's environmental sustainability and energy efficiency. The Abu Dhabi Investment Council and Tishman Spire put the Chrysler Building on sale again in January 2019. It was reported in March 2019 that Avi Rosen's RFR Holding LLC, in a joint venture with the Austrian Signa Group, had reached an agreement to purchase the Chrysler Building, albeit at a steeply discounted price, for $150 million United States dollars.